today's event is a great opportunity to talk about where a degree in computer sciences can take you. We're really lucky to have Mike and Henri be able to share their stories with us this evening, but it's important to keep in mind that in addition to these stories and these paths, there's always so many other paths to go down as well, which is really, really exciting. So I guess my first question, and I think I'll start with you, Mike, if that's okay, is to talk a little bit about how you figured out what you wanted to do. So before we dive into what happened after graduation, I wanted to know what were the factors that influenced your decisions and help you decide what you wanted to do when you graduated. Where did you want to work?
Yeah, so I think like prior to university, I think I was always destined to get into technology. I was the kid that always pulled everything apart and, was always on the family computer, consuming every minute of it. Once I hit UOW, I joined the IEEE computer lab. I don't even know if that's still a thing anymore, but I met a whole pile of like-minded fellow students. And I think from that lab, because we were running and sort of maintaining the computers ourselves as students of the lab, it sort of got a keen interest in system administration. And I think that sort of set the path for me on figuring out sort of that was the type of role that I wanted to do post-grad.
Yeah, that's great. So you sort of always knew that you had, that interest, but then once you got to uni, you were able to solidify that even more by the sounds of it.
Find a particular interest area in that field.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Was it a similar experience for yourself, Henri, or how did you figure out, what you wanted to do?
I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had some skills, mostly in a maths sort of direction back in high school, that I knew that I might be able to do something with. My dad comes from a sort of engineering background, and like he brought up the option of engineering as a degree. I think before that he was like nudging me towards law school. Here's also a good option, and I almost ended up in computer science by mistake at that point. It was one of the interviews I did for early entry at UOW, and they're like, "Oh, you could also come join us here. Why not do both?" And it was only a couple of years into doing that double degree that I'm like, "No, I think I'd rather do programming than electrical engineering." There's this loop of between you making the thing and the thing existing that's a lot shorter in programming than it was ever going to be over in electrical engineering.
Yeah.
Now that I'm in the field, I am still figuring out where I'm going.
I think that's really interesting, right? You've raised a couple of points that I think are worth reflecting on there. One being that sometimes we do have a push from external factors, whether it's our parents or from other people. And sometimes that works really well and gets us to consider things that we haven't really considered before. But then sometimes it's not always for you. So maybe law school isn't necessarily the way that you wanted to go. I had a very similar thing from my parents. They wanted me to get into business and business alone, which is definitely an excellent degree, but I always knew maybe it wasn't always the path for me. So sometimes those nudges are helpful, but sometimes, it's about figuring it out for yourself too. And it's interesting to hear that sort of as you went along, you kind of also started studying and then was able to refine, which parts, so that perhaps computer sciences were more your vocation rather than the engineering side of things. So that's really, really interesting. So what about your journeys after graduating? Mike, can you tell us a little bit about what was it like for you when you first left university, and how did you get that first job after graduation?
Yeah, so I think I had a little bit of an overlap. So just before graduation in final year, I was able to pick up a local job in Wollongong with a tech company that did small business IT consulting. So I did have that sort of part-time job that I was in as I was graduating, which then obviously made me feel a little bit confident that I knew that I was on a path out of uni into work. This was 18, 19 years ago now. So it's, I can't remember if Seek was the place that I went or something like that. But, and so, yeah, it was a local IT company, and I feel, always thankful for that job to sort of get me started in the industry.
Yeah, fantastic. What about for you, Henri? You're a bit more of a recent graduate than Mike. Did you have a similar sort of experience in finding work, or how did that happen for you?
Oddly enough, yes, actually. Surprised to you hear Mike starting a story similar to mine, is I ended up with about 18 months overlap, so that was a fair bit. It was a very gradual transition. I got an internship that I was seeking out about the summer of 2018. I didn't find it on Seek. I was applying for a bunch of different roles at all sorts of places that were offering internships, mostly big corporations. And I found the internship through Silicon Valley instead. So again, like a smaller local company, and that kind of transitioned out of the full-time study through part-time back to full-time work. Made it a lot smoother. And I consider myself very lucky that I ended up with that.
Yeah, fantastic. So tell us a little bit more there. So you mentioned that you would do, you were applying for different places, but then it was actually through Silicon Valley. So through sort of not necessarily work, but sort of work adjacent networking. And so how did that conversation happen, or how did you meet the people that were to offer you the internship and then subsequently your role?
It was a friend of mine who encouraged me to go to a Silicon Valley meetup. The topic of it was infrastructure or infocoders, which wasn't specifically my area and continues to not be my area. But a friend encouraged me to turn up. I turned up. He was half an hour late, so I was just standing there awkwardly trying to make the best of being in a stranger's office. But it was that sort of the conversations that happened after that meetup. That there's a couple presentations, but then it's mostly just kind of networking, which means eating pizza and drinking whatever you can find in the office fridge.
Sure.
Just going out of my way to have a couple conversations with the people who were there. Easy Agile happened to be hosting it, not that I quite realized at the time. So those were the people that some of the people who were really open to having a chat with the strangers who'd showed up. And it turned out that they were considering having an intern for the following summer. So we didn't have that sort of conversation at the time. I just mentioned that I was a student. This is the sort of path I was looking for. And they didn't offer me anything on the spot or anything, but they suggested I connect with them on the Silicon Valley Slack channel. So it was kind of that form connections after the event, just make sure that you're still on people's radar and they can still contact you.
Yeah, look, that's really interesting. And I might actually sort of jump forward to some of the questions that I had, because I think we've hit on something really interesting here about, networking and the connections that can happen and where sort of things can lead. For yourself, Mike, have you had any similar experiences? Like, has networking been a big thing for you in your career, or whether it's sort of those formal kind of programs or more informally, as Henri has alluded to? Has that been something that's helped you?
Yeah, definitely over the last sort of 5 years of my career. I think there was a point roughly 2015-ish where I decided that I would get into public speaking, and that was a really different environment for myself at the time. And so I started sort of talking about the work that I was doing at Atlassian on a public stage, which leads to those conversations post-talk, and found that the connections that I made after those sorts of events led to the next thing, and then that leads to the next thing. And so that sort of chaining different events together with the communication of different networks you create. And then, you mentioned that I wrote a book at the beginning. That would have never happened without those networking events and meeting the people I met along the journey. And so I think that almost it becomes so fun to network with other like-minded and similar industry people.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that, because I think a lot of us sometimes think about networking and can see it as a thing that, you hate doing, that's really intimidating and really uncomfortable. But you're right, when you're connecting with people that actually have really similar interests, then, really fantastic things can happen. And it's interesting, both of you have sort of, the key seems to be first and foremost putting yourself out there, whether it's I'm going to engage in public speaking, or I'm going to go to this meetup, or I'm going to putting yourself out there in some way. Secondly, following up those post talk, discussions, or following up on the Slack channel or whatever it is, connecting online, connecting on LinkedIn, that kind of thing, and then continuing that follow up. So like you said, way leads on to way, and sort of going on to the next thing. That's really interesting. What about sort of in terms of networking, what about mentoring? Has that been something that, either of you have found that to be beneficial or helped you find either further work opportunities or even sort of just helped you figure out, other opportunities or things that you're interested in? Henri, has that been something that has been of interest to you at all?
I did end up in a mentoring program for a couple of months back there, run by the university. The person I ended up being paired with was the co-founder of one of the other companies within Silicon Valley. It's actually somebody I'd met before that.
All right.
It's really, there's this real sense of that, like, you do all of these networking things and you never know which one is going to be the one that provides that next step in your career. It was good to get that perspective from somebody who was already working in the field, though, and that was a connection that turned out to provide a lot of context later on when I went to work in that field. Like, that was a known figure in the community, and like that company is still a big part of Silicon Valley. I'm not sure it gave me a specific leap, but especially for a little while there, I think I ended up on the radar of a good deal of people in Silicon Valley, at least those who were keeping the eye out for students and young people. I knew I was starting to know the landscape of the culture I was working in.
And that can be really helpful, right? So sometimes I guess, you're looking for networking or mentoring so you can get that foot in the door or make the next step or whatnot. But sometimes, yeah, you're right, particularly with mentoring, it can just be around building your knowledge, building your awareness, knowing who's who, knowing the names of different companies, different peoples, that kind of thing. What about for yourself, Mike? Have you been a mentor or a mentee, and how's that been for you?
Yeah, my mentoring is a little bit different, I guess, because it's coming later in my career. And it's been less about an individual, more like teams. And so I've done a lot of mentoring of other teams and other companies about like them setting up similar sorts of processes and technology, sort of, especially around the cloud financial management space that I work within, being able to sort of talk to them and unlock sort of some of their thinking. Which that led to the work I do now at the foundation in sort of connecting large groups of people trying to figure out their pathways. And so mentoring was less about an individual and more about a collective group of the industry.
Yeah, fantastic. That's really interesting. Thank you. So sorry to jump ahead, but I just felt like we were on a really interesting point there in terms of the networking and the mentoring side of things, and we probably will come back to that again. I just wanted to ask you both, I've already got some questions coming in, which is great. So everyone else, please continue to add your questions in the Q&A and I'll get to them very soon. But if you could both tell me, so might start with yourself, Mike. If you can tell me a little bit about what's your day-to-day role sort of entail at the moment? And is there anything about what you're doing now that really sort of surprised you, or, is it very different to what you thought when you were a student your work life would be?
Yeah, definitely. So when my first year university, I took, because computer science is quite a universal class, and you can actually take classes from all over the university, which is really cool. And so I took a first semester in accounting. And after the first semester, I decided that it wasn't really for me. I don't really want to be dealing with money. And then, all these years later, after doing lots of sysadmin work, falling into the Cloud Center of Excellence at Atlassian, I ended up starting doing the cloud cost management stuff and aligning heavily with the finance teams, and realized that actually this is where I'm really good at. And so now in the day of life, so all the stuff around FinOps is really around, understanding our costs, working with our teams about building efficiencies. And so there's a lot around the technology of cloud, but a large portion of what I do today is still driven around dollars, which is something that I didn't think that I would get into after the first semester university.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's sort of just going back to what you said before, Henry. Sometimes when you say engage in mentoring, you don't know where it'll go, you don't know if it'll help you out in the future, same with networking. And it's probably the same with sometimes subjects that you study. You think, oh, I may or may not use this, that maybe this isn't relevant for me, but sometimes everything comes back around again and things are quite useful. How about for you, Henry? The work life that you have now, is it sort of what you anticipated it would be like when you were studying, or how is it different?
It's I mean, it is still a desk job. This is the desk I work from in my home. Generally, I've been working remote for a while now, but even despite working remote, it's a bit more collaborative than I expected. Spending more time, as we all are at this point, on Zoom calls, on little audio calls, just to sync up with what other people are doing. Like getting tasks done on a technical level is a lot more collaborative than I expected it to be. And there's kind of a system to it of you aren't the only person responsible for your work. Is you do a task and then other people review it, and they are also partially responsible for it before it goes anywhere. And especially as somebody who's still kind of learning a lot of the technical skills, even while I'm doing that, I'm still like, hey, is there a better way to do this? I'm stuck on this point. Is there some context for this that I need to know? It's a lot more collaborative than I expected. And I also spent a lot more time than I expected reading other people's code. And that turned out to be fairly useful. There's a lot that I've learned that I wouldn't have thought to do myself, but I've seen it in other people's code. And that's been a big part of how I've learned over the last several years.
Right, that's really interesting. So are you saying to me that given that you weren't expecting things to be so collaborative, that those dreaded group assignments that a lot of our students are currently doing has some of that, like what you've learned there about collaboration, has that actually been paying off?
Collaboration in a work context is very different from group projects, and that may be a relief to most people who are currently doing group projects. In companies that are already established, and it probably doesn't apply as much as at the startup level. I joined Easy Agile about 2 years into its existence, once it already had a pattern of work and wasn't just kind of smashing things out to make it happen. There is a system to it, like code reviews are part of the work, and that's accounted for when you're planning how much time it's going to take. And also everybody's actually got specific set hours for it, instead of the everyone's got a different timetable and also maybe a part-time job. And there's a lot more structure to it, and that really does help. And also there's other people who know more than you do, and it really makes it a lot easier to do. There's a system for it in a way that there isn't in a lot of group projects.
So that's really interesting there as well, because I guess what I'm hearing there is, in terms of if you're working for a more established company, or if you're working for a startup in its very, very early stages, or even only a few years in, your experience will be very, very different. So it's probably helpful, I guess, for our current students and also our recent graduates as well, to think about, how they feel that they might work best, and then sort of, target their search from there. We've had 2 questions come in, so I'll just jump into those before I jump back into mine. So our first one is from a current postgraduate student. So they're coming into computer science. They've got a bachelor degree in finance and over 10 years of work experience in management. So a really fantastic, diverse background. And would like to ask more about what kind of opportunities are available in tech that capitalize on those other backgrounds, other than just the technical skills of computer science. Would it be possible to leap into those positions without actual IT experience? So that's a really good question. Mike, I might throw this one to you first.
Yeah, I kind of feel like this question was written for me to answer. With a background in finance, I can kind of selfishly say that cloud financial management is begging for you to join. There's lots of companies trying to figure out how to do IT financial management. Outside of the cloud, you can look at the ITSM on SAM protocols, which are TBM is another one. So these are sort of like keywords of industry terms that are around doing IT financial management. So the more your data standard driven stuff. So having that knowledge of how a business does financial controls and financial management, and then taking the IT skills and IT knowledge you learn from a university degree, you're sort of combining the two and having that perfect mix for someone looking for cloud financial management. That's basically, to many extent, I had just that little tiny bit of financial knowledge from, bit of UOW stuff, and then some of the stuff I did with small businesses over the years, and I use that with the IT knowledge to be able to flesh out a career. So someone who's got lots of financial history should be able to easily find that space.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, hopefully you can expect a job application from this person very soon. We've also had another question just come in as well from someone who said that they're actually looking at a reverse move from a career perspective. So coming out of years in finance and looking to move into IT. How hard do you think it is for a mature age person to start out in the industry? I might go to you first, Mike, and then over to you, Henry.
I think the age should not be a problem. Like, you need to be able to emphasize what, like, the skills you've learned over the years in your previous career. And I feel like a lot of people think that career changes means you throw out all the skills from previous life and then start fresh. But I think there's a lot more connection. Like, you've worked in business, and business needs a lot of skills. I think when I look at sort of the interactions happening inside of enterprises today, you're sort of moving, the dev term would be like the full stack, engineer. I think that we're getting the full stack business people that understand how business leaders think, how financial people think, in order to get, that sort of you build it, you run it, services management that understands the business around running services. So just make sure that you're really emphasizing the skills you've learned in the career you've got so far.
Yeah, I think that's really, really great advice. Henry, what do you have to add? Do you see people from, I guess, all different ages and backgrounds working and successfully in your organization as well?
Yes, we've had a lot of sideways moves like that internally as well, which has been fascinating to watch. But I don't think we've seen anyone from finance specifically. We've actually had a psychologist doing a career change into computer science. It's coding is a little less emotionally weighted than counseling, and that was the change he was looking for. So he's come in with about the same level of technical knowledge that I had, but he's in his mid-30s, I think. Mm-hmm. That was the change that he wanted in life, and because he sorted out, that's where he ended up. And he's had no less value for that background, and it's for him that having more of a sense of how people work has been helpful in in that collaborative sort of context. And I think there's similar methods for that kind of, if what you're working on as a team, if that's going to delve into any sort of financial context, knowing what that is like from the other side is always going to be useful. It's you don't just need to know how to program. If I'm making a product, who are my users and what are they? What's their perspective on it? Where are they coming from? And if you've been on the other side of that, that gives you a lot of leverage.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And when you just sharing that example of your colleague who's got a background in psychology, I don't even work in computer sciences, but I was thinking, oh well, that would be great for user experience and design and that sort of thing, because it really is about looking at things for how will my client or customer base use this. So that's really interesting. We actually have had another question come in. I'm doing my master's in IT at the moment and trying to do AWS certifications side by side, but not sure about my path afterwards. Any suggestions on which companies I can apply for if I'm mainly focusing on cloud computing, or what certifications I can do before applying for jobs, as I don't really have any experience in the field? I might go to you, Mike, first for this one.
Cloud computing is a big field. growing very, very fast. I think I've watched Gartner's forecast on how much dollars are being going to be spent on cloud computing for the last 5 years, and every year they increase the forecast. I think the last I saw was something around $1 trillion by 2025, 2026. So pretty much every company, definitely, like, and not just technology companies, like your banks, like if you look at NAB, they've got a huge cloud footprint now. Your traditional SaaS companies are obviously, all got cloud, but I think that you'll find that there's a lot of companies, technology and not, that are looking for cloud experts. The reality is clouds, while on a timeline, it's probably 14 years old. The reality is it's huge take up's been in the last 6 or 7 years. And so that means that there's a huge vacuum of engineering power that needs to be trained and educated. And so I think that you'll find that having that, whether it's AWS or the other big vendors, that sort of knowledge, and getting into those sort of, grad roles or the sort of junior roles in a company that's going cloud, you'll be fine.
Yeah, thank you. And Henri, what are your thoughts on that? Have you, I guess, in addition to having a degree, what other certifications have been useful for you, or do you want to attain or would recommend someone obtaining?
I've only barely used my degree so far, given that I started without one. In fact, they never even asked for a transcript, which was unusual in all of the applications that I was doing at the time. They just kind of took my word for it that I was currently a student.
You have a very trustworthy base.
Yeah, I think the people I was talking to would have noticed if I was lying. But that's the qualifications. I think I've only done one formal qualification after uni. I've done a few different bits of training here and there. The only one I've done was field specific, which was a scaled agile framework. It's called SAFe, and that was, I think, again, from the context of being on the other side, one of the major products that we make here as a company is to support other organizations doing that scaled agile transformation. So it's not so much that I need to do scaled agile, it's that the people that I'm building for are doing scaled agile. So that's a certification that I'm not personally using, but again, it's that context about it. It's not that I need to have this piece of paper and go, yes, I'm qualified to do this, but the learning has given me context. A lot of my learning's been less formal than certificates, but still fairly well respected at my workplace.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's really interesting. It's good to know that, I guess, the learning, even when you graduate, continues, and it comes in many, many different forms. How's that been for you, Mike? Have you focused a lot particularly on different certifications, or have you looked for other sorts of opportunities for learning or training or, on the job kind of development?
Yeah, I think that, like, any good career should have a element of training progression. The IT industry reinvents itself a lot. It likes to change, and it also likes to go in circles. And so I'm waiting for the day that we go back to mainframes or something like that. But I think that always finding the sort of, like, what's the next thing I could learn. Henri mentioned before about having the other smart people around you, like taking advantage of them in the informal training context, but then also just looking at we call it like resume building, or maybe LinkedIn building, and just figuring out, like, what's the next thing that you should be adding to your LinkedIn page. And whether or not it's about getting the next job is really irrelevant. It's just that feeling that you're able to take that extra bit of skill that you've learned from some training or some certification program and try and apply it back into your day job.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And I think, for our current students and for our recent alumni that are tuning in, one good way to also find out, if you're not sure of sort of what's out there, is, you know, as we've heard, speaking to other people and talking to them about what they would recommend, but you can also do a little bit of professional stalking on LinkedIn and have a look at some of the profiles of people that you admire, that have the jobs that you might want to have in a few years' time, and see what they've done, what their background is, what qualifications they have, certifications they have. And that can be a really great jumping off point to see, oh, you know, you might even notice some you know, consistencies. If everyone seems to be qualified in X, or everyone's got a certification in Y, and that can also sort of help direct and focus study a little bit as well. So Henri, I'll jump over to you now in terms of advice. So what advice would you give to students and to our recent graduates on making a successful transition from university into work?
I think, I mean, getting the job is probably the hardest part. Like that first job is what's going to build the rest of it. Like the experience that I've got at Easy Agile is probably the key thing that I will use to get my next job when eventually I'm forced to leave the company, I guess. I'm hoping it's not anytime soon, honestly. But that making that leap for me, I think, was mostly less about specific technical skill. Even now, I'm a bit lightweight on that. It's more breadth. Like you may have heard, like there's a whole thing about like a T-shaped engineer. It's like you're deep on one thing, but you've got that breadth in other things. Like you've got a background in finance, you've got experience in psychology. You've got interests outside work that don't really apply to your specific role, but turn out to be kind of relevant anyway. It's that sort of breadth, I think, is how I ended up with the work I have. And it's, you know, for me, it was stuff like communications and writing. Now most communication is done by writing, so that's been really handy for me. But there's a whole transition phase of work is it's a different process, it's a different culture, which is hard to really embody when you're working remotely, but there's a different pace to it. Like instead of this like deadline, schedule your own stuff, like struggling to interact with other people, there's a process for it. Like you might not always have the 9 to 5, especially like remote and flexible working is more common, but the 8 hours a day is not 8 hours of solid focus a day. There's the meetings in there, there's just chatting with people for seemingly no reason. It's hard to do remotely, but it's worth doing anyway. Like at the office, it's just I'm making a cup of tea and I'm having a snack in the kitchen, and so are 4 other people, and now we've been having a chat for half an hour, and this may or may not be related to work, but it's part of the work. There's a different pacing to it, which is for someone like me who likes that structure of when am I doing stuff and how fast am I expected to do this again. Yeah, really helps.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. It's important for us to keep in mind that, you know, it'll be a little bit different, like transitioning from studying into working is, you know, yeah, different environment, different culture, different expectations for ourselves. So allowing a bit of flexibility as well. Mike, what about for you in terms of, I guess, qualities or attributes that you think are necessary to succeed in your profession or for people to do well? What would you say is important there?
Yeah, I think Henry's point there around that soft skill set, being like, you know, Henry's already mentioned a few times that a lot more of the job is around, you know, not just sitting in front of the computer programming in isolation. There's a whole pile of team collaboration, alignment with thinking, you know, planning. There's a lot of planning that happens with releases, and you know, if you move into the sort of agile world, you've got the things like sprint planning and stuff like that. And so a lot of the soft skills there are around being able to get everyone on side with an idea, or being able to drive forward one sort of commonality and thinking. And if you're just focused on the fact that you're, you know, able to code 7,000 lines a minute, it doesn't really matter if you're unable to actually work in amongst that team that's around you. Really think that it's probably undersold in a lot of times for people looking for their first job, is worrying about the soft skills that they bring.
Right. Okay. So in terms of, what organizations are looking for when they're recruiting, what are some of those key things? It sounds like it is things like communication and collaboration. Are there other sort of key things that you think, or buzzwords that you see in someone's resume or application that you think, oh, that sounds really good? What stands out to you?
For me, I think especially for a grad sort of position or a junior position, I'd be looking for that willingness to learn. So it usually comes out pretty quick in the resume about the things you've done, the engagement you've had, like the types of digital daddling you've done at home on the computer, the projects, side projects you've done. And I guess that being able to communicate why is a job in IT important to you. Like you've chosen this career path, but your resume should tell me as someone reading it that like this is a path for you because you're telling me your story. I think that if you look at the people around you, that they're all going to have a degree from UOW. What makes you different than everyone else who's graduated is your story of why you picked that degree and the things that you've done around the degree that you've done at UOW.
And so do you think that narrative and that story is important for both the technical skills and the non-technical skills? So we've had a question come in here, which is relating really strongly to what we're discussing about what kind of expectations do companies have for entry-level programmers in terms of both technical skills and non-technical ones. Henri, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that it's important, for an applicant to explain sort of not only what their skills, hard and soft skills are, but those motivations and, I have developed XYZ because I'm passionate about blah, or what's your advice there?
I think one of the things of tapping into that, like what story does your resume tell? Like the story that I end up telling of that period of like, I switched from a double degree into programming because this is what drew me to it. It is that thing of like, not just what skills do you have, but what are you interested in personally? It's a good company when they're trying to recruit isn't like trying to fill chairs. It's your interests as a potential employee going to align with the company's interests. They don't need to be the same, but like if that company needs to improve their infrastructure, are you a person who's interested in infrastructure? Like if you're in that role, are you going to not go out of your way in a sense, but be like looking into how this can get better? Are you going to be actively interested in what's going on here? And that's so I think it's less about like what exactly you've got, but also why you've got those skills and qualifications. What are you interested in, and are your interests going to be relevant? And also, are you interested in things? If you're not interested in anything, we're going to, that is a struggle. The one thing I'm not going to do is use the word passionate about things. I have never been passionate about my job. I find it interesting. I find it satisfying to create a thing. It's like that's the part that I enjoy about this job, and I think Easy Agile's got that sense of like, that we need somebody who's going to make things. That's why I'm not over in the infrastructure department because they know I'm not interested in that. But we have people who are, and I'm very glad they are.
Yeah, I think that's really important, that interest and that curiosity will, if you can demonstrate that in an application, that's really, really helpful. Mike, what are your thoughts in terms of, for say entry-level programmer, if you were recruiting someone for that sort of role, what kind of technical skills would you expect to see on that, demonstrated on that application?
I think this answer is going to change to the type of company and the type of role you're going for. It's kind of like there's a middle. I think there's like a hard edges and a soft middle in the industry here. That you've got the startups who really just need people who get in and do it. Right? They don't have the time to train you because they're really trying to get off the ground. Once it's flying, they got that width and that sort of ability to sort of look for someone who has the need for those around you to bring you up in the knowledge. And when you get into that soft middle, you're really sort of showing that ability to learn, that you should be able to demonstrate some skills in this area, but it's a sort of a common understanding that you are hiring a junior position, the junior will come up with the other seniors. And then I think as you get up to the other end, you've got these large enterprises, and especially the ones that are hyperscaling, that they sort of start to return to that once again, don't have the time to bring juniors along. And so you're really looking for those enterprises that have grad programs, that they're going to be a lot more willing to train because they're actually doing intern and grad programs. They understand what that means. Or definitely don't be going for the second day startup that's really just looking for 5 seniors to kick this thing off the ground. You're looking at the companies in the middle that understand what it means for a junior to join. We talk a lot at Atlassian, like the progression from a sort of junior into a senior is that mastering the craft. And so you can't expect juniors to join and be mastered of the craft, being able to write, all the code without any other feedback. And as Henri has already pointed out, like there's a lot to learn just by looking at other seniors' code. And then over time, you start writing code in similar ways. So I think there's also, I guess, a layer of imposter syndrome that can really quickly kick in for early grad, thinking, am I enough for this company? But I think just there's a certain level of having to have faith that you're bringing something to this company and looking at yourself in that light.
Yeah, definitely. And like you say, particularly if there are, internship or graduate roles or sort of more entry-level positions, they are, designed for people that are sort of a little bit fresher. And so you're not necessarily going to be expected to know absolutely everything. There will be, some support there, which is really great. Henri, we've got another question that's come in terms of, I believe, from someone who's currently studying. And they would like to know, how critical do you think your major in your degree or subject selection is in getting that first job? Is that something that's been important to you or that you've seen, be important there?
I think there is a way in which it could be useful, which is that, why did you do it? Like, does this demonstrate a specific interest in your field? Like if you've done a major in cybersecurity, you're not just a student who's done comp sci, you are actively interested in this field. So if you are applying for cybersecurity roles, you go, I have already been working towards this. I want to continue working towards this with you as an employer. Having said that, follow your interests, because that demonstrating your interest is how it is useful. I did no major at all, and in fact dropped my major in order to finish university sooner. I think that cut a couple of required subjects out of my degree, so that because I was ready to move out of university. It's and likewise, there are people in my organization who've done I come from a comp sci background. I've got a colleague at the same level as me who followed a similar path to me from a mechatronic engineering. Colleagues from boot camps, from switching careers, using a little bit of a boot camp sort of thing like that. And the most technical co-founder of my company has no degree at all. It's your major is useful so if you're interested in it, because it demonstrates that you're interested in it, but it's not required. It doesn't have to be critical, but you can make it useful.
Yeah, I think that's really important, is make it work for you as much as possible. And like you say, it can help you, but it also doesn't necessarily have to limit you either. Would you agree with that, Mike? What are your thoughts on about, when you've been looking for, colleagues to join your team and whatnot, has the major that they've done or particular subjects been something that's been really crucial there, or has there been flexibility?
Yeah, I don't think so. If I look at I did software development and security distributed systems, and I don't do either of them today. So I can talk about why those subject areas were interesting to me at UOW, and why once I had picked a pathway out of uni, it didn't matter that I wasn't going down the pathway of those two particular specialty areas. And I think, as Henri has mentioned, it's really about the story behind your choice of those things. If it was just because you thought it looked good on a resume, it doesn't really show the passion for getting into the field. Cybersecurity is a great example of that. Like you can use pretty much every software developer has a hat of security. It's hidden in their back pocket. They can't be developing software without a thinking about security. And you know, a lot of companies, including Atlassian, will put security as tier 0, the first thing we think about, because that's the thing. So it doesn't mean that you have to go into cybersecurity just because you did a cybersecurity specialty, but you can use it in telling your story of why it was super important for you.
Yeah, fantastic. That's great advice. And so we've just had a question come in as well from someone who says that they're a mechatronics engineer and they're interested that, you know, what skill certification should they go for after doing a master's? We'll start with you, Mike, and then we'll jump over to Henri.
This one, I've been watching this question come up and wondering what I'm going to say to this. My specialty area, mechatronic engineer. And so I'm going to try and dodge the bullet and throw Henri under the bus here, because he just mentioned that one of his colleagues did mechatronics, so maybe he has something to say.
Yes, I heard you say mechatronics, Henri, and I was like, right, this will be good. What are your thoughts?
I'm reasonably sure that colleague comes out of mechatronics. It was that or computer engineering, but they're very adjacent at UOW, where at least for the first 3 years. I'm not sure about certification specifically, because again, it's like having the pieces of paper are useful sometimes, but this isn't a heavily regulated field like engineering is, where you have to check a box in order to be an engineer. And you can only be employed as an engineer when you've got that certification. It's very much like, does your certification come from an interest in it and demonstrate an interest in it? Like somebody in chat was talking about they're doing AWS certs. It's like, if you're a person who's interested in AWS and to the point where you're getting taking like formal training on it, then if you're applying for a role in a, say, infrastructure, that's going to demonstrate that you were a better fit for that role than somebody who's not done any specific looking into any sort of infrastructure. You don't need to check a lot of boxes in this industry. It's not that you need them, but how can you make them useful? And I think what Mike mentioned about like what story you're telling is a similar sort of basis.
Yeah, so would perhaps possible advice for this person to be about, you know, the certifications and degrees, obviously useful, of course, but that other options could also be some volunteering or some interning or some other, joining a professional association or network and sort of building experience in that way might potentially be an option. What's some other advice that we have about how our audience can increase their employability generally within the industry? Henri, what are your thoughts?
I do think that experience is a good deal of it. And if you're not at employment sort of yet, I didn't have a lot of experience in this field and very little before I actually joined. But some of the kind of like make your own experiences. If you found a technology that you've got super interested in, like, or just, you know, something that's caught your eye, of like, oh, I wonder how this works. Can I make something with it? Or I want to make this thing. What tools can I use? Those sorts of side projects are the build your own experience method, which as a person who like has difficulty with big projects sometimes, that hasn't been great for me. But we've had people applying, I think are currently our grads. They've go, oh, you know, I've got the specific interest in, and this is just the example that's come up in today, is like, I've got a specific interest in AWS. I've tried spinning up this sort of thing with it in order to do this. Even if it didn't work, you say, I tried this and I can see why this wasn't the right tool for it. Or, you know, this is a project I tried, like I did it for like 2 weeks and then abandoned it because it, like once I'd done it, it wasn't interesting to go back to anymore. It's that sense of like, I've tried a thing, I've learned a bit more about how that works. I can see how I would use it in this context, or it's, yeah, build your own experience is the available path there, I think. And the networking is kind of how you say, hey, I've got this experience. Do you happen to know anyone who's also interested in this experience?
Sure. And so when you say build your own experience, how does someone demonstrate that though? Do they create their own website and sort of post about it on there? Do they, like, how would you share that so that there's, I guess, evidence that they could take forward in an application?
It's, I mean, if you've got your own website, I think I feel like there's some sort of expectation working in this field to have your own website. I do not yet. I think I'd like tried it and it looks horrible, so I've told nobody where it is. It's, but like, not even just a website, or like even just a hosted blog or LinkedIn post or something like, hey, this is a thing I did, and that also demonstrates the like soft skills of, can you present what you've done back to either your stakeholders or people with no technical background, or people who do have a technical background, different audiences for different writing. It's, I'm interested in this thing, let me tell you about it. Networking or on LinkedIn or in a blog post, it's, I did this thing, let me show you how it works, or draw you a diagram of how it works, or actually show you the thing if you can. Not everything's going to be like that from a technical background. Like a website's easy to show off, like, hey, look how cool my website is. Look how cool my machine learning thing is something I've seen in videos. I think a colleague did one to like identify different types of cockroaches for some reason, which was weird but interesting.
Yeah.
Weird but interesting. It's a good, it's a bit of a feature in this sort of field. It's, yeah, there really is like, this is the thing I did, let me tell you about it.
Yeah, well, I guess it just goes back to what we're talking about there in terms of it demonstrates the, you know, interest or the passion or the curiosity. So yeah, that's really interesting. What do you think, Matt? And do you have a website? I'm going to ask you that question.
No. I don't know. Like, I think websites are like business sites that if they're not updated often, they kind of detract from the story.
Yeah.
But I think if you rewind time, Steve Wozniak took his crazy home built thing to the local networking event and showed it off. Like, I feel like that's really all we're talking about, 40 years later is go do stuff. I would say if you're struggling to think of the next idea, then don't come up with a new idea. Go look on open source projects. There are so many open source projects that would love the skills you've already gained from UOW to just come and help them, whether it's, with some UI, whether it's some coding, whether it's even just answering some of the bug fix problems that they've got in their issues backlog. And that stuff is easy to show that you've done stuff in the open source community for a potential employer. So there's a whole pile of skills you'll gain from picking up an open source project, learning the code, figuring out how it all works, and then contributing something useful to it.
Yeah. Look, that's fantastic advice. And I think, it's really important, like you say, just to sort of get started, and then, way leads on to way. Just wanted to jump back and also ask, because I guess it's a little bit about, that demonstrating what we've done and a little bit in terms of networking. Have either of you do you use LinkedIn a lot or other sort of online networking platforms, or how has that been for you? Is LinkedIn something that you engage with, Mike, and have you found it useful for connecting with people in your industry?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is a really useful resource, especially once you start attending networking events or meeting other people. You'll be able to just connect and stay connected with them. And then you start to become sort of aware of the events they're going to, which might cross over an interest area of your own. I find, like almost as far as a professional sense, my LinkedIn is my public profile effectively. There's no way I'm Facebook friending you. That's
yeah, no. It's not the right platform. What about you, Henry? Do you use LinkedIn? Have you found it useful in terms of the online sort of networking space and for follow-up as well?
Yeah, it has been this. It's like the professional Facebook in my experience. Like, if I go to a social event, like, hey, I know you told me your name at the beginning of this direction, but I've already forgotten it. Can you search for yourself on Facebook on my phone? It's the professional version where like you keep those lives not completely, but a bit separate, to go like, hey, we met at this event, so that this like isn't lost to the void of I have a really bad facial recognition. Like, can we connect on this? And the sort of even later on trying to find those people, like I definitely met somebody who worked for this company and was interested in this, and they might be a good fit for like this question I have, or I'd like to form a panel about this topic to submit to a major event that I'd like to work with. Like we don't interact on as that sort of like everyday friend level, but the connections stay there even if you aren't interacting much, and it kind of helps you locate like who are the people with those specific interests. Oh, they've got them written down on LinkedIn. It's I remember who this person is, their face and the name of their where they're working for. It kind of keeps a log of that, so you don't have to remember all of those. And I hope it's doing the same for appearing for other people. I usually appear on my company's socials only when people over in the marketing department remember to do that. They're on top of it. I just turn up sometimes and they tag me. I'm like, cool.
But I think that's the thing, right? Is that you can, connect with people and forge those connections there, which is really helpful. And you can draw on that straight away if you need to, or it might be, 6 months, a year, a couple of years into the future, and you think, oh, yeah, I've got that connection, and you can sort of follow them and see what they're doing. But it also means that once you've made that connection and you share, hey, I did this thing, I've, been working on this great project. I've connected with this colleague, they're amazing. And you give them a shout out or whatever it is that you're posting on there. You are also staying on the radar of people that might be future colleagues, future employers, people that have those, same interests and are like-minded as well. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm pleased to hear that you're both sort of on there and enjoying that platform. So thank you so much to Mike. Thank you so much to Henri. It's an absolute pleasure to have you as part of our amazing alumni community, and really appreciate your time for joining us as well. So thank you all. Have a good night. Take care, and we'll see you at our next event. Thank you.